Liam of Carcanne. A place to grow. Several hundred years ago, the king of Carcanne commissioned the building of 4 great trade routes to ferry goods across his nation. These roads would start at the kingdom's capital of Royst Castle, in the heart of Carcanne, and head out in each of the 4 directions of the compass. Over the years, the paths and roadways that pre-existed their creation bent, and connected to the new highways integrating them into the daily lives of the people of the nation. This birthed the 4 great cardinal roads that made up the backbone of Carcanne's infrastructure. This would lead to the country's growth and establishment as a regional power. All along the highways, new towns and inns sprang up over the centuries. Some towns were quick to rise and fell by the wayside over time. Some stood the test of time and grew into mighty trading hubs in their own rights. Others grew to a comfortable size to support the local farmers and merchants traveling the highways, and then just maintained. This was how Stossen came to be. Starting as an inn and rest stop on the western branch, as the locals referred to it, Stossen became one of several popular stopover points heading out of Carcanne. It didn't take long for the farmers working the fertile ground in the Gap Valley to open stalls to sell their goods to people stopping at the inn. As more people used the town, more space was needed, and the town, like many others, grew with no real plan for what it would one day become. The story of Stossen's founding had reminded Liam of the spread of the interstates back home. There had been no tidbits in Denholm's recanting of this story about struggling trade centers or small towns that died off because of the highway's construction, but he couldn't help but picture a medieval version of Route 66 existing somewhere in the country. If there was a Carcannese equivalent to Pixar, would they have made a story about sentient wagons rediscovering their long-forgotten wagon trail past? These were the sorts of things Liam spent his time thinking about while completing his chores in between Denholm's lessons on Carcanne's culture and history. Over the past week, Liam had learned as much as Denholm had time to teach him about the local way of life and traditions of Carcanne. His lessons had been thorough and covered everything from the hierarchy of the church to when Liam would be expected to dress in formal clothes. Alongside his lessons, Liam had picked up many of the more physical duties around the church, like weeding the garden beds, harvesting the peculiar amount of food the plants always seemed to be producing, and delivering the food to needy members of the church around town. The congregation of the Church of the Maiden had been accepting of Liam's plight, and word about his need had traveled among its members quickly. They all believed the cover story Denholm had told him, of course, but it wasn't too far off from the truth. Liam was a stranger who had been delivered to the church one day by a merchant who had found him on the side of the road with no memory of his life before. With no way of knowing who he was or where he was from, Denholm had taken him in and was helping him to get back on his feet. It was the kind of story that would be suspicious back home, but here it seemed to work just fine. After a couple of days, on just the father's word alone, several members of the congregation had thrown Liam extra work doing random jobs for them, cleaning out stables, tending their private gardens, or helping them move heavy objects. He had done more manual labor over the course of the last week than he had since leaving for college, but it was earning him a bit of extra money and building his reputation as a capable young man around the town. Besides, the sudden change in his workload was easy to get over compared to many of the other changes he had to process. For one, the bathroom situation in Carcanne was not what he was used to back home. It was his understanding that the rich portions of the capital had what he thought of as rudimentary forms of indoor plumbing, but there was nothing so tidy here. Outhouses and chamber pots were the norm in Stossen, and that took some time to get used to. Also, the people of this world were probably far cleaner than his own ancestors had been in similar times, but deodorant was still a long way off being invented. He did his best to ignore the smell of the people around him, and he prayed to whatever god would listen that his nose would soon go blind to them. But after a week, that particular prayer had yet to come true. As for his own bathing rituals, he was committed to wiping himself down every night before bed, and when waking every morning before starting his day. Stossen did have a local bathhouse, but he couldn't afford the steep prices to go in and have a hot bath. Clothing he did his best to keep clean by regularly changing out his undergarments and keeping them well washed. Denholm had purchased 2 pairs of simple tunics and trousers for him, as well as a couple of pair of underclothes. In Carcanne, as in times gone by, people changed their undergarments regularly to keep clean, but only changed the nicer outerwear as needed. Liam fell into this practice as well, even though he was pretty sure he was washing his undergarments more often than many of the people around him. The food was similar enough to home, if a little bland. They'd never heard of many of the spices he thought of as normal fare, but their use of herbs and what seasoning was available to them made the food as full of flavor as it could be. Surprisingly, the local diet was very heavy on vegetables, with meat used for flavor most of the time. Steaks were for the wealthy, but a pork pie could be had at a stall for cheaper than a Big Mac back home. It had only been a week, but what Liam wouldn't give for a burger and fries. He was sure he could make a killing in the food industries of Carcanne if he could just find some potatoes and a meat grinder. Drinks were available at any tavern in town, of which there were several, and were not forbidden by the Church of the Goddess, though Liam was careful about how much he drank when invited out by the people who had hired him. He didn't feel right returning to sleep at a church while hammered. The far more interesting thing, at least to a budding historian as Liam had been, was the free availability of clean drinking water. In medieval Europe, and indeed in other parts of the world and across different times, water had been so dirty for a multitude of reasons that drinking it plain was dangerous. It still was in many parts of the world. But before filtration and other water cleaning techniques were discovered, the safest thing to do was to just not drink it. Beers and ales, thanks to their brewing processes, were inherently safer to drink and had the advantage of getting you drunk. So they were drunk far more often than people consumed alcohol in modern times. But not in Carcanne. Every water source the town utilized, even the fountain in the center of town, was safe to drink from. It was another hour until sunset on the 9th day of what Liam was beginning to realize was his new life. He had spent the afternoon finishing up clearing out one of Denholm's garden beds so he could rotate its crop now that the final freeze had passed. Liam didn't know much about gardening. He was just acting on Denholm's orders any time he did something with the plants, which just lent more to his utter confusion about the nature of the friendly priest's garden. There were plants producing fruit here that he was almost certain were out of season, and the amount that some of them yielded was just beyond his understanding. All he ever saw the priest do was water the gardens and feed them with some kind of liquid fertilizer the church provided. Taking a break, Liam stood and stretched out his back before leaning against the raised sides of the garden bed. He paused to look around the garden and contemplate his day's efforts. It was a far different kind of life than he had ever expected to lead, but in just a week he was beginning to understand why so many people enjoyed gardening. Before he could get too far into his own thoughts, Denholm appeared from behind the chapel with a pitcher of water and a distraction from his wandering mind. "How's the work going?" Denholm asked, pulling up alongside Liam and arranging the pitcher and 2 cups on the cleared soil of the garden bed. "Just about finished, I think." Liam picked up the pitcher and filled both cups before taking one for himself. "I've cleaned everything out and doused the ground with the fertilizer you gave me." "You watered it down first, right?" Denholm asked with a tone of concern. 4 to 1, water to fertilizer like you said, Liam responded after shifting the water in his mouth into his cheek. "Good," Denholm nodded. "That's powerful stuff. You don't want to use it without diluting it first." Liam nodded and took another long drink from his cup of water. The two stood in silence for a moment while Denholm surveyed the garden much the same way Liam had only moments earlier. Liam's eyes, however, were resting on the pitcher. "The water." Liam swirled it in his cup before looking up to the other man. "Where do you get it?" "The pump behind the chapel." Denholm motioned towards the cottage where he lived. "Same place as always." "Right, but where does that come from?" "Aqueducts bring it from a spring north of town." The priest motioned vaguely north with his cup. "The whole town has access to it?" "Well, the church is special in that we have our own dedicated pump, but they are scattered all around the town for anyone to use." "Why do you ask?" "How is it safe to drink?" Liam asked. "You don't have filtration. You don't boil it before you drink it. In a town this size, it's hard to believe the water stays safe to drink." "The source is blessed and purified once a year, and that keeps the water clean." Denholm took another drink of the topic. "The goddess keeps your drinking water clean." Liam looked briefly to the chapel and then back to the priest. He still wasn't convinced the image of the statue had indeed been a vision sent from the goddess. "Well, in a way, I suppose, yes." Denholm turned slightly and sat down on the edge of the planter box. "All members of the clergy, priests, clerics, friars, all have to learn certain prayers dealing with different kinds of purification after taking their vows of poverty. The church uses those to cleanse any source of drinking water they come across. It's my duty, as head priest of this church, to cleanse the towns once a year." "You cleanse the water source once a year." Liam turned what Denholm said over in his mind. "You cleanse... Did you say with a prayer?" "Well, the church claims they're lesser miracles from the goddess performed at the request of the clergy, but after seeing some people from outside the faith do similar, I'm pretty sure they're just spells." Denholm looked around conspiratorially. Don't tell anyone I said that. I could be excommunicated. You use a spell to clarify your town's drinking water? Liam stood up and walked away from the garden bed. Denholm failed to notice as Liam's movements became quick and agitated. Again, quiet, the priest insisted. It's a minor miracle. A minor miracle. Liam lifted one hand as if he was about to say something, and then let it fall and slap onto his thigh before turning a full circle and looking around the garden as if an answer would pop out from among the plants. Turning back to face Denholm, he waved the same hand as if trying to clear aside an unseen obstacle to his thoughts before continuing. A spell? Liam repeated, his voice raised and filled with frustration. You use a spell. If anyone else hears you, we're both going to be homeless, Denholm insisted, but gave up trying to correct his young house guest when he noticed how upset he had become. You're telling me you use magic. Liam waved his hands in front of him as if casting a spell over an invisible cauldron. Magic? To keep your drinking water free of disease? Yes, the priest said slowly. His bald head bobbed as he nodded, supplanting the more casual tone he had been using up until this point. Denholm softly changed his mannerisms and voice. Imperceptibly, he took on the mentor persona which he often used when teaching new concepts to people. Is that a problem? What do you mean, is that a problem? Liam said, his arms flailing in frustration as the water spilled from his cup. Of course it's a problem. Why is it a problem? Magic isn't real. Liam's arms dropped to his sides again and his shoulders slumped. Since when? Denholm asked plainly. Since always. Denholm stared at Liam in silence for as long as it took for the latter to calm. He took a long drink from his cup and refilled it from the pitcher before motioning towards Liam to do the same. The priest waited until Liam had refilled and taken a long drink from his cup as well before speaking again. I take it you don't have magic in your homeland? He asked after Liam had calmed a bit. No, of course not. It's the kind of thing you see in movies and video games. It's embedded in stories we tell our children, but it's not real. The energy had gone from Liam, but there was still a tension built into his tone that seemed to Denholm to border on anger. What about those car things you told me about? Your miniature clocks and devices for talking great distances. Denholm ignored Liam's casual use of words he didn't understand. It was a common occurrence when the two talked, and he didn't believe now was a good time to press for definitions. Their technology. There's a science behind how each one of them works, a tangible, explainable process for how they are powered and how they turn that energy into the action we want. There's no waving of hands and saying magic words to just have something happen. Liam gesticulated more carefully as he talked so as not to spill his drink this time. Technically, I say a prayer, Denholm corrected Liam's assumption, and there is no hand waving. But still, you'd say some words, and there is a reaction that produces some thing that then keeps your drinking water safe for a year? Pretty much, yeah. That doesn't sound crazy to you, Liam asked. No more than a man from another world suddenly appearing in the woods and outrunning a wolf. Denholm's comment killed the momentum of the conversation, and the two sat in awkward silence for a moment. Send me home, Liam said suddenly, setting his water cup down next to Denholm and spreading his arms as if expecting to be struck by some kind of magic bullet. What? Denholm asked, concerned Liam was just going to work himself up again. Send me home, Liam demanded. If magic is real, then you should be able to just wave a hand and send me flying back to class. That's not how it works, Denholm said, but Liam wouldn't let him finish the sentence. What do you mean that's not how it works? The aggravated tone at the edges of Liam's words seeped further into his speech as his arms collapsed back to his sides. It's magic. Just think of some pretty-sounding gibberish and send me back. Do you really think I would have waited a week to do that for you if I could? The priest's words brought Liam crashing back down again. There was a tinge of hurt in them that forced Liam to remember just who it was he was talking to. If Liam had learned only one thing in his short time in Stossen, it was that Denholm would burn down everything around him if he thought it would help someone. There was no way Liam would still be here if he had a way to send him back. Look, Liam, some magics are an everyday occurrence here. The water being kept safe, the healing draft sold in the market, even the fertilizer you spread on the garden bed, they all have some magic in them. Most people don't even realize that without it, drinking water would be scarce, let alone know how to use it or how it works. On the other hand, many forms of magic are still quite rare. I myself don't know the first thing about spellcasting. I say the prayers that I was taught in seminary, and I get the results I was told I would get if I said them. I only compare them to spells because of personal experience. What you're thinking of, spell casting, is a gift that only some have, Denholm explained. The ability to create a new spell fresh is a skill that only a limited number of those people have. Then to have the power and the knowledge required to send you home when we don't even really know where that is, there's a reason I never brought it up. I get it. I'm sorry I yelled. Liam's words faded. All signs of his frustration and anger fell away as he slumped back down onto the wall of the garden bed. I suppose I would get excited too if I were in your shoes, Denholm agreed. The only reason I didn't mention magic before was because I honestly assumed you knew about it. The things you described as being commonplace in your home really sounded like magic to me. The fact that it's not speaks to just how far ahead of us you all really are. Only in some ways, Liam commented dryly. As much as our technology has expanded, sometimes we lose sight of the people around us. Your community here in Stossen is more close-knit than a lot of the families I know. I'm sorry to hear that, Denholm said, and Liam could tell he really meant it. Strife of any nature troubled the priest, even if he couldn't see it. Denholm was the rare man back home who would have done anything to help anyone at any time, and Liam was proof of that. Silence lingered between the two as they sat sipping their water for a few minutes. They watched as the sun dropped below the last edges of the chapel, and where they sat fell into the long shadows that preceded the night. Speaking of good people and good deeds, Denholm broke the silence and reached into his pocket. I have a favor to ask of you. There is let's say a situation between a young woman here in town and one of the soldiers at the fort. Denholm picked his words carefully. One that needs to be addressed rather quickly. What kind of situation? Liam asked, as Denholm handed him the paper. It was neatly folded and sealed shut with wax. There was a name written across the front of it in the priest's handwriting. The delicate kind that I'm not allowed to talk about, but will come to a head in less than a year. Denholm eyed Liam, who understood instantly. Where I come from, we call that a shotgun wedding, Liam confirmed. Wedlock by weapon point is the unofficial term in my line of work. I like yours better. Liam nodded. What do you need me to do? I took a letter for the young woman this afternoon explaining the situation to the soldier. He has no idea, but I won't be able to head to the fort for a couple of days yet to deliver it. I thought you had 9 months. Liam was tempted to double-check the fact, just in case things were different here. Her father knows, and is threatening to send her off someplace. Usually I wouldn't get involved, but she insists the soldier would stay by her side if he knew, and a family together is better than a family apart. Fort Grenskading, Liam said, remembering the sign he had seen a week earlier. All he had learned of it in the last week was that it was the fort that watched over the border crossing at the Gap Pass. Yes, I wouldn't ask you to take it, especially not after your recent experiences in the woods, but the man I usually use for these sorts of things is out of town on guild business. That's a long walk. Liam eyed the paper in his hand. If you leave while it's still dark out here, you'll arrive there after it gets dark again, Denholm agreed. But it is doable in a day. You could walk out tomorrow and deliver the letter before turning around and heading back the next morning. Liam had reservations about walking along the Cardinal Road again. After all, his last experience with the road had been a hard one. He was unsure if he could handle a round trip on its length so soon after his mind had betrayed him. Looking at Denholm, he could see the pain on the priest's face as well. The men really did care about Liam's safety and mental health, even after such a short time together. Protector of young lovers, huh? In Liam's mind, he conjured the image of the spinning figurine that was encased in the chapel a few feet away. I'll leave first thing in the morning, Liam said before taking another drink of water. The silence returned between the two of them as they continued to watch the night slip into the void that the day left behind. Liam of Carcanne was written and read for you by Will Hansen. For more information on Liam or any of Will's other works, please visit the Wooks Books Facebook page, Twitter, or YouTube channel. If you'd like to show your support, please like, subscribe, rate, and leave a comment where available. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.